It's great to welcome back to the program today Tim Miller, host of the Bulwark Podcast, never Trump Republican, former RNC spokesperson. I have a whole list of possible titles here, but we won't use all of them.
Those are good.
Tim, I've been listening to your podcast, and I want to talk to you directly about two things that are happening right now and the dynamics of this very interesting presidential race. Number one, the early attack lines against Kamala Harris, and number two, what seems to be the growing weird and strange attack line against Trump and JD Vance. Let's start with the former. The initial attacks against Kamala Harris included her laugh is like a cackle. She doesn't have biological children. She was the border czar or is the border czar, and she failed. This sort of thing. Do you think these attacks make sense knowing the way that the Republican machine operates? Like, do you understand why these are the attacks they're choosing? And do you think that they're effective?
Yeah, well, I do understand why the attacks that the Republicans are choosing. Look, the Republican machine is very good. I used to be part of it. Is very good at identifying perceived weaknesses, identifying things that are maybe a little bit over the line that Democrats wouldn't want to engage in because that gets attention, that gets people talking about it. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it backfires. Sometimes you can go too far over the line. And I think that during the Trump era, there has been this weird conventional wisdom that has congealed that you can't go too far over the line because it worked for Trump, because Trump got elected. Everybody said and then he became president. And so they've used that rationale to justify doing stuff that like we wouldn't have done, back in my day in the Romney Republican days. And I think that these attacks on Kamala, I want to put the immigration one to the side, but the cackle, the attacks on her laugh, the DEI attacks, the attacks about childlessness, I think those are over the line. They're going to backfire. Even Fox News host Stuart Varney and Neil Cavuto were making this point yesterday on Fox, I
I
noticed.
saw that.
Yeah, and I think that there's a group of people in the middle of this country that maybe have certain complaints about the Biden-Harris administration and were maybe open conceivably to a Trump ticket or open to just leaving the top of the ticket blank. But they live in a society. They have nieces or sisters, or maybe they themselves are childless. They like the fact that Black people and people of color are getting more opportunities in our society now, right? Like these are good middle class, middle of the road people, and they don't like this kind of schoolyard bully, racist, sexist BS. And I think it's turning them off. And I think it's a big loser for them, the identity-based attacks. I think some of the policy ones might be more effective.
Okay, so now that you wanted to put the border czar thing aside, there's been somewhat of a focus on that. Trump retruthing some memes about it recently. The counter has been, she's just not the border czar. That's mostly the counter that I've seen. You consider that one to be in a different category?
I do, just because like she did that Lester Holt interview. There's a Trump ad out today that talks about the problems with the border, and there's a lot of lies in it. It like kind of blames Kamala for the fentanyl crisis, which is ridiculous. Fentanyl comes in mostly through points of entry, legal ports of entry. But just as a general, just speaking only as a political matter, right? This notion that whether or not she was technically the czar, like that was part of her portfolio dealing with root causes of immigration. There are concerns about that among people in the country, some of them legitimate, some of them overblown. And she gave that interview to Lester Holt, really before she kind of had her sea legs in the role of VP. She comes off a little dismissive of it. They use a quote where she talks about how she hasn't been to the border. She's like, I haven't been to Europe either. I don't know. I watched that ad and I could see how that might work with a certain demographic of gettable voters. And I think that in general, her biggest potential vulnerability is just for the less engaged voter, kind of the person that's not watching this YouTube feed, that is only getting politics news via osmosis. Just is this a California liberal? Is this an open borders left wing socialist, somebody that's anti-capitalism that I can't vote for? That's not true about Kamala Harris, but that is a dangerous perception for her political prospects that I think she has to aggressively push back against. And I think that is a much bigger potential vulnerability than the identity stuff.
If you were advising the Trump campaign right now, what would you see as the best attack lines?
that she might be trying to put on, a new moderate clothes, but underneath this is a far left California liberal that wants to, force you to sell your guns back to the government, that wants to completely decriminalize the border, that wants to, raise taxes on the middle class, raise taxes on small businesses, that doesn't want to do anything about inflation, that can't solve inflation because she's just a big tax and spend liberal. Like,
The standard stuff.
yeah, I think that a standard stuff that she's a far left tax and spend liberal, more liberal than Joe Biden. Yeah, I think that is what I would stick to, because the people that they're trying to get, you have to understand. There are people out there that are racist and sexist that won't vote for her because of that. They're already not voting for her, right?
Right.
And so that's why I don't think those attacks work, right? So the people that they need to get, that the Trump people need to get over the bump are, you look at Georgia, for example. Let's just use Georgia as a prime example. He lost by whatever it was, 20,000 votes, something like that last time.
Wasn't it
11,000. Yeah, there you
11,780
go.
or something?
I was thinking of the Raffensperger call in my head. How many did you get? 11,000. It was 20,000 in another state. 11,000 votes, right? Those 11,000 votes, and you could cut it a bunch of different ways. Maybe it's turnout, maybe, but like there are a lot in the Georgia suburbs, in the Atlanta suburbs. There are a lot of traditional conservatives. They voted for Brian Kemp for governor. They
Right.
voted for Raphael Warnock for senator because Herschel Walker was too crazy. They voted for Joe Biden for president because Donald Trump got too crazy. And Donald Trump is starting to try to win some of those folks back. And if you're the Harris campaign, you have to stop that. And if you're the Trump campaign, the way to win those folks back is not to be like, this is a childless cat lady. The way to win those folks back is to be like, this is the California liberal that you guys don't like and why you need to vote for Mitt Romney. And I think that kind of softer approach would be their best bet.
Now let's talk about the long, strange, weird, and creepy trip that it's been the last few days. The attacks on JD Vance as being weird, Trump is creepy, Pete Buttigieg, Tim Walz. I mean, they're all on message about it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Been pushing this for a while. It worked on Blake Masters in the midterms. I was on the Wilderness John Favreau, I think a year and a half ago, where I said that the Democrats should lean into this. It absolutely worked in Arizona. I have a pollster friend in Arizona who was shocked by the number of verbatims. Verbatims are when you do a poll, you're like, hey, do you want Mark Kelly or Blake Masters? Do you think things are going well or poorly? And then at the end, they say, why are you for Mark Kelly or why are you against Blake Masters? And he said it was insane how many people said he's weird, he's creepy, I don't trust him, and like it worked. That the Kelly versus there's Masters campaign, that line of attack worked. Those same people I was just talking about in the Atlanta suburbs, they are, they're just regular businessmen with families. I say men because most of the women most of their wives are already voting for the Democrat. And they are not looking for some tech bro weirdo who wants to, determine whether their daughter, is allowed to, take, get medical treatment for ectopic pregnancy. They're not they do not want some guy that is obsessed with having genital checks at high school swimming meets,
right?
To make sure all of that stuff is weird and it's creepy. I think creepy is really the key word because that is about somebody that wants to have control over other people. Weird might be like you have weird interests, like you're into knitting or whatever. You have weird interests, but like that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about,
is knitting that weird though?
I guess not. I guess maybe 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 in certain demos, knitting might be kind of weird. I guess you're right though. What would be
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Like being really into bats. I don't know. Like there are plenty of things, having a pet rat. I had a friend with a pet rat. That's kind of weird. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about creepy. We're talking about these guys that want to have control over other people, and they have these obsessions with gender and with when women are having babies and with whether women can, be in charge in boardrooms and whether you drink your Bud Light or, what the opening ceremonies at the Olympics were all about. Like these guys are all just obsessed with weird stuff. They want to control you, and people don't like that. And I think that's an effective message.
Before we move on to a couple of polling things, since the failed assassination attempt on the failed former president. There were these moments where initially it was Trump struck by a bullet, or was it a piece of glass from the prompter, but the prompter was fine, so it was a bullet, at least according to Trump, but then we didn't get a medical report. Christopher Wray goes, we are actually still trying to determine it, but then now it was a bullet. We just don't know if it was like a shot from the bullet or a fragment of the bullet, or kind of a careening bullet that was going end over end after striking something else. Listen, I don't know what it was, although the injury seemed quite modest. Is your take that it's not really a great strategy to keep talking about what exactly and how Trump was struck? Like, it's just not useful for the left to really talk about it very much?
Totally. I think it's a loser. It makes people sound crazy themselves and a little conspiratorial. Like, the reality is a bullet went flying past his head.
Right.
Even in the conspiracy theory version of this, right, where it's a fragment, it's like he was shot at. There's an attempted assassination. A bullet went past his head. He was bleeding out the ear, and then he had the wherewithal to kind of stand up in that moment and have that iconic picture. That was, in that moment, it played right into Trump's frame of this campaign. He was making this frame of this campaign that he's strong, Biden's weak, and
Yep.
that really played into his hands. And obviously he got lucky. Thank God that the bullet wasn't a little bit closer to him, or else we'd be having a whole different conversation right now. So I just don't think that talking about that element of this is helpful at all for the left. Here's one thing I do think is worth talking about if that subject comes up: the fact that this was another troubled young man who had easy access to an assault
Right.
weapon. And it's
Right.
like, why was he able to get up there? It wasn't about the Secret Service. It wasn't about rhetoric on the David Pakman YouTube page. It was about the fact that he had easy access to a automatic, or to an assault weapon, and he had easy access. He could just walk into Home Depot and get 50 rounds of bullets and walk right out, despite the fact that he was underage. Right? Like, he couldn't have bought a White Claw that day, but he could have bought 50 rounds of bullets. I think that is, again, going back to who this core audience is, these suburban swing voters. They don't want troubled 20-year-olds to be able to get ARs. And I think kind of reframing this conversation about that, rather than about, whether there was a second shooter on the grassy knoll, would be wise for the left.
Do you think if Trump does end up dead that day, Joe Biden is still in the race today?
No.
Really?
I don't think that I got in a lot of trouble in my podcast from people that are big Biden fans. So, we're maybe I'm trying to let bygones be bygones on this. Joe Biden couldn't campaign. Joe Biden was not capable of doing the basic things necessary to campaign. I'm not saying he couldn't still be the president, but he could not make compelling, coherent arguments. Even in his Oval Office address the other day, he's still talking over his words. People say it's a stutter. It wasn't. He does have a stutter, but he sounded very different than he did 4 years ago. Just watch the clips of him 8 years ago. I think, I don't know. I think we would have been a very scary time had Trump been assassinated. I have no idea who the Republicans would have nominated. Literally, you could have literally told me anybody, besides Nikki Haley. It wouldn't have been Nikki Haley, but it would have been somebody MAGA. But that person would have had momentum in the polls, and the kind of rationale for Biden staying in about the threat to democracy. Look, we're in a total counterfactual, but I think that the pressure would have continued to mount on him to step aside because of his inability to do the basic elements of a campaign, which require, a certain level of being able to communicate.
So June 26th, the day before the debate,
Yep.
Real Clear Politics polling average is Trump plus 1.5. Today, as we record this interview, it's Trump plus 1.7. In the intervening time, you saw maybe the worst debate performance, I guess, since Nixon from Joe Biden.
Way worse. But yeah, continue.
Yeah. You saw Trump survive an assassination attempt, have a week-long party celebrating him at the RNC, and finally finish the Veep Stakes reality show that lasted months or a year and select J.D. Vance. And all of this got him 0.2 percentage points in the national Real Clear Politics polling average. What's going on? Since isn't this supposed to be the peak after all of these successes and victories?
Yeah, he got no bump out of the convention, which I think is very noteworthy. He did get a modest bump out of, to call it a bump is maybe a little gauche, but his polling did improve for a little while after the failed assassination attempt. But that's come back down to earth after Biden dropped out of the race. And I think right now, what you're seeing in the polls is kind of this reversion to the mean. Trump's main advantage in the polls all year, really, was that there's certain parts of the Democratic coalition, traditional Democratic voters, that were unhappy with Joe Biden either because of inflation or age. It was or Gaza. It was younger voters. It was Black and Hispanic men mostly, and then a handful of other voters who had issues related to inflation or age, and they're traditionally Democrats. All of those folks, nearly all of them, are already home with the Democrats, with Kamala. And so that now we've reverted back to the mean, and we're back on the same ground of which type of voters to compete against that we were in 2020. It is working class white women, who are unhappy, who I didn't want the overturn of Roe. It is college educated men that have been traditionally Republicans but don't like Donald Trump. These swing voters. And then there's a turnout battle that's going to happen. So I think right now, essentially, after like the most insane month in a half century in politics,
Right.
we've really just reverted back to the mean. And I think that Kamala has room to grow. And if you look at these poll numbers, it usually takes about 2 weeks for stuff to sink in, and so I think that probably we'll see her poll numbers improve over the next few weeks as she chooses a VP and has a convention of her own. How much? I don't think she's going to be up 55-45. That's just not the country we're in. But
No.
I think that she'll improve, at least modestly, in the coming weeks.
So in a sense, it almost seems like, I mean, Trump got 46% of the vote in 2016. He got 46 point something in 2020. He's polling 47.
Yeah.
Is this just the peak of what Trump can garner as far as support in this country?
Yes, this is the other good news. I think that Trump is about a 40. Maybe I think he could get up to 47 because I do think he's improved a little bit with that group of working class men of color. Again, tiny bit. So if he has 46 point something, that you push up another 0.5 to 47%. I think that's probably realistic to see that. But 47% isn't enough to win unless RFK Jr. gets a big slice of the pie, or some of these other third parties.
Well, hold on. He won with 46 in 2016.
Right, but why? Because Gary Johnson and Evan McMullin got huge percentages. I don't have in front of me, but got significant percentage of the vote, way more than the third party candidates did in 2020. So in 2024, what you didn't want was people that were unhappy with both candidates to have this off ramp, if you will. And RFK, he has like a handful of super fans, but then besides that, he was just gobbling up people that were like, "I'm sick of these two old guys. I don't want them. I'm going to go for the also old but slightly less old guy instead."
Right.
This is a protest, right? Now that Kamala is there, I think that protest vote number is going to go way, way down. And she is going to gobble up all the people that are traditionally Democrats that weren't happy with Biden. And then, she's got to fight to get her number up to 50, 49, 50, enough to win a close election. I think that's really doable. I think the map is very doable for her. It opens up more states having her on the top of the ticket, but it's going to be a dogfight. Like I don't see a blowout coming, but I think that if you have Trump at 46 or 47 for Kamala, it's about kind of hoovering up as much of the rest of that group as possible and getting the RFK number as low as possible.
Last thing I want to ask you about relates to JD Vance.
Yep.
It seems to me JD Vance doesn't really get Trump any new votes. Tell me if my instinct is wrong. And then also there's rumors that Trump is displeased with the way the JD Vance experiment is going and that maybe there's a change coming. Is that even realistic to think about or no?
I wouldn't say it's a 0% chance. We're living in strange times, but I think it's pretty small. Those rumors, I can say on pretty good authority, is there is a group of people around Trump who are traditional foreign policy hawk Republicans that kind of hope that they can just put their own people in the in the Department of Defense and Secretary of State and kind of get most of what they would want. And they were very unhappy with the JD Vance pick because he's more of a nationalist isolationist in the mold of Trump.
Yes.
And so I think it's I think that what you're hearing is rumors and gossip mongering dribbling out of that world, right? Trying to undermine Vance. Will that work? Probably not, but I think that they're going to try to kneecap Vance, people in that traditional foreign policy hawk kind of wing of the Republican Party. And then as far as Vance is concerned, electorally, he does add nothing. I thought so at the time. I do think they tricked themselves. I think Don Jr. tricked his dad, at least, into believing that he helped with like upper Midwest working class white males, and I just there's no evidence of that in any of the in any of the polling or in JD Vance's election performance, which was way worse than the Republican governor on the same ticket, Mike DeWine, who doesn't claim to have any ties to Appalachia or the white working class. So JD Vance is not he has negative charisma, and his comments about women. I think Trump being weird, there's part of the reason why the weird thing is landing now, just to circle back to that, is Trump's weirdness has an appeal to certain people, not me, right? It's kind of like he's like a avuncular, charming, like New York. He's weird, but it's like in a way that makes you laugh. Some people, not me. JD Vance doesn't make anybody laugh.
No.
Like his weirdness is just you are creepy. You want women to stay in marriages even if they are being abused. You have deep thoughts about when women should bear their children. Like it is creepy. It is unusual. The way you carry yourself is creepy, and I think that is like splashing up onto Trump in a way that's unhelpful for certain voters.
Not to mention, I don't know if you've seen video of the campaign stops with Usha Vance. She does not seem happy to be there. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but combining the expressions on her face and her prior comments about Trump, I struggle to believe she's done a 180 and is totally behind this thing.
Yeah. Well, you made your bed and you got to lie in it. You made your couch and you got to lie in it.
You got to lie, exactly. Tim Miller, host of the Bulwark Podcast. Always great to talk to you, Tim. Thanks.
David, thanks for having me on, brother. See you soon.